Section 1. Eggs 1 through 10, where it all began. There is something quietly satisfying about a show that rewards the people who pay the closest attention. Most people watch Family Guy in the same way you might listen to a song on the radio, you enjoy it while it plays, then you move on. But then there are the other people, the ones who hit pause, the ones who squint at the background of a grocery store scene to read the label on a cereal box, the ones who notice that a street sign doesn't quite match anything in the episode's logic, or that a book title on a shelf carries the specific punchline that the dialogue never bothered to say out loud. Family Guy has been rewarding those people for well over 2 decades, and tonight, we're going to take our time moving through 101 of the things they found. This is not a list meant to be absorbed quickly. Think of it less like a countdown and more like a slow walk through a house you've lived in for years, finally opening every drawer and cabinet you never got around to checking. Some of what's behind those doors is genuinely surprising. Some of it is absurd in the best way. And some of it quietly tells you something about the people who made this show. The writers hunched over their desks in the small hours of the morning, deciding to hide a joke inside a joke that most people would never see, just because they could. So settle in. Let's begin at the very beginning. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999, airing immediately after Super Bowl 33. That time slot alone brought in around 22 million viewers for the first episode, a number so massive it probably terrified the network as much as it thrilled them. But before any of that happened, before the show had a single fan, Seth MacFarlane sat down and made a 15-minute pitch pilot with a budget of roughly $50,000. And already, in that rough, unpolished prototype, the first Easter eggs were being planted. Easter egg number 1. Lois was originally blonde. In the original pitch pilot that MacFarlane assembled to show Fox executives in 1998, Lois Griffin had blonde hair. Not the auburn red she has worn in every version of the show, since she was visually a completely different character. The pilot was considered lost media for decades. Only a 7-minute portion appeared as a bonus feature on some early DVD releases. Then in March of 2025, the full original 15-minute pitch was found on animator Robert Paulson's website, and fans got to see the prototype Lois in all her blonde-haired glory. The redesign to red hair before the broadcast version was never publicly explained. It just happened quietly between the pitch and the air date, a small but foundational change to one of the show's most central characters. Easter egg number 2, Chris was voiced by Seth MacFarlane in the pitch pilot. Speaking of that original pitch, the voice cast was dramatically different from what you're familiar with. In the final broadcast show, Chris Griffin is voiced by Seth Green, who auditioned for the role and, according to one story that circulated for years, was dared by a friend to try his best Buffalo Bill impression from Silence of the Lambs during the audition, which is apparently what landed him the part. But in the 1998 pilot, Seth MacFarlane himself was voicing Chris, along with Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire. Butch Hartman, the creator of The Fairly OddParents, also voiced several characters in that pilot, including Mr. Weed, the factory boss Peter works for at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. Meg was voiced by Rachel MacFarlane, Seth's sister, rather than Lacey Chabert, who would take the role for the first season of the broadcast show. Easter egg number 3. The first episode's title was part of a theme MacFarlane wanted for the entire series. The first episode is called Death Has a Shadow. The next few are I Never Met the Dead Man, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, and Mind Over Murder. If you line those up, you start to notice a pattern that seems almost deliberate. According to trivia on IMDb, the original early episodes were structured with titles that echoed the naming conventions of old radio mystery dramas. Things like Death Has a Shadow, Death Knocks Twice, Driver, Death. MacFarlane apparently wanted the first season's episode titles to carry that noir-inflected flavor. The idea was eventually abandoned because the writers found that titles built around actions and events were easier to reference in conversation than titles built around dramatic themes. But for those first handful of episodes, there's a hidden stylistic intention buried in the titles themselves that most people never noticed. Easter egg number 4. The show's production code system encodes information about when episodes were made. Every episode of Family Guy has a production code, a string of letters and numbers that appears in technical documents and credits. The first broadcast episode, Death Has a Shadow, has the production code 1ACX01. The A in the middle isn't decoration. It indicates which production cycle the episode belongs to, And fans who have charted these codes across all the seasons have been able to use them to identify episodes that were produced out of sequence, which happened more than you might expect, especially in the early revival seasons when the writing room was restaffed and schedules shifted. The codes sometimes reveal that an episode you watched in, say, Season 5 was actually written and produced during Season 4, and that it aired later due to scheduling decisions made by the network. The gap between production order and broadcast order is one of the reasons casual viewers sometimes notice continuity inconsistencies that feel impossible to pin down, and this is why. Easter egg number 5. The sheet music above Lois's piano in the opening credits is real and correct. The Family Guy theme sequence is one of the most recognizable in animation history, all big band horns and choreographed family chaos. In that sequence, there is a brief moment where you see Lois seated at a piano, playing along. On the music stand above the keys, there is a sheet of music. If you pause on it, which you absolutely can do on a streaming platform, the notes on the page are the actual, playable sheet music for the Family Guy theme song. Composer Walter Murphy wrote the theme, and someone at some point during the production of that opening sequence decided it would be more interesting to put the real sheet music on that stand than a blank page or generic notation. It is a detail that serves no narrative purpose whatsoever. Almost no one would ever notice it. The people who made the show put it there anyway. Easter egg number 6. Peter Griffin's voice was based on a real person. Seth MacFarlane overheard. This one comes from MacFarlane himself, and has been confirmed in multiple interviews over the years. While he was a student at the Rhode Island School of Design, MacFarlane overheard a security guard speaking somewhere on or near campus. The guard had a specific way of talking, a kind of loud, working-class Rhode Island accent with a particular cadence and rhythm to it. MacFarlane held on to that voice and used it as the foundation for Peter Griffin, which means that somewhere out there was a real human being walking around Providence, Rhode Island in the late 1990s who had absolutely no idea that the way he talked would become the vocal template for one of the most famous animated characters of all time. That security guard whose name nobody knows, who has never been identified publicly, who presumably went home that evening and watched television, or sat with his family without any awareness that his voice had been quietly observed and catalogued, is, in some sense, the most anonymous famous person in animation history. He is embedded inside every episode. Every time Peter opens his mouth, that man's cadence is there. He is everywhere in the show and nowhere in any credit. Easter egg number 7. The buildings visible from the Griffin backyard are based on real Providence skyscrapers. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. But what you see in the distance beyond their backyard is not entirely fictional. The skyline visible in those shots, the cluster of tall buildings on the horizon, is based on real buildings in downtown Providence. Specifically, you can identify stand-ins for One Financial Plaza, 50 Kennedy Plaza, and the Bank of America Tower, which was built in 1927. A researcher named Martin, who ran a website called quahog.org, once documented this in detail, noting that the angle at which the buildings appear suggests the Griffin House would be situated somewhere to the west of downtown Providence, which lines up with areas like Johnston or Cranston. Seth MacFarlane did name Spooner Street after Spooner Hill Road, which is near his actual boyhood home. Easter egg number 8. The big blue bug that appears in the show is a real Rhode Island landmark. Rhode Island has something called the big blue bug. It is a 58-foot-long fiberglass termite perched on top of a pest control building in Providence, and it has been there since 1980. It is an actual, genuine, real-world structure that Rhode Island residents have strong feelings about. The show has referenced or depicted it multiple times. For viewers outside of New England, it reads as just another absurdist Family Guy invention, a giant blue bug sitting on a roof for no reason. For Rhode Islanders, it is like watching a show reference your neighborhood diner. The big blue bug isn't a joke, it's a landmark, and the writers knew that some portion of their audience would recognize it immediately while the rest of the country sat confused, and they clearly enjoyed that arrangement. Easter egg number 9. Happy-Go-Lucky Toys, Peter's early workplace, is a parody of Hasbro. In the first few seasons, Peter works at a toy factory called the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. This is not a random choice of employer. Hasbro, one of the largest toy manufacturers in the world, is headquartered in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is directly adjacent to Providence and is one of the real-world cities that Quahog draws from. The choice to put Peter in a toy factory and to name it with that cheerful, generically wholesome sound was a deliberate nod to the real Hasbro sitting right there in Pawtucket. McFarlane and the writers had direct geographical proximity to the company and folded it into the world of the show in this oblique way. Peter eventually leaves the toy factory and ends up working at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, which is its own entirely separate Rhode Island reference. Easter egg number 10. The Drunken Clam Bar has a real-life counterpart in Johnston, Rhode Island. The Drunken Clam Peter and his friends' go-to drinking spot is the kind of bar you feel like you've been in even if you've never set foot in the state. Low ceilings, neon signs, sticky floors, a jukebox nobody has touched since 1997. But it also has a real counterpart. There is an actual bar in Johnston, Rhode Island that locals connected to the Drunken Clam in the show, and which was included in a bus tour organized by the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council that took fans on a journey through real-world Family Guy locations. Writer Danny Smith grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island, and his local knowledge contributed to the texture of these places. The world of Quahog is not invented wholesale. It is the actual Rhode Island landscape run through a comedic filter. What's worth noticing before we go any further is that even the first 10 Easter eggs on this list already sketch the outlines of what Family Guy really is at its core, a show made by people who knew a specific place, remembered it with affection, and then used that place as the foundation for something much larger. Rhode Island is not incidental to the show. It is woven into its basic texture, from the Providence skyline, to the real bar, to the Big Blue Bug, to the toy company in Pawtucket. The show is not set in a generic animated American suburb. It is set in a very specific part of the northeastern United States that its creators knew from lived experience, and the care they took to encode that specificity into the world of Quahog was never intended to be noticed by most of the audience. It was there for the people who would look. Before we move any further, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight and what time it is. Whether you're in bed with the lights off, or parked somewhere quiet with headphones in, or stretched out on a couch with something warm to drink, we want to know where this found you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a genuinely good moment to do it. It costs nothing and it helps more than you know, and it means we can keep making things like this long, slow, detailed walks through the hidden parts of shows that deserve a second look. Section 2. Eggs 11 through 20. The hidden architecture of the opening sequence. There is a version of the Family Guy opening credits that most people have never seen in full detail, not because it's hidden in some vault somewhere, but because it goes by at a speed that discourages close reading. When you've seen the same 30-second intro 200 times, your brain stops processing it and starts skipping it, the way your eyes skip over a familiar sign on a commute you've made 1,000 mornings in a row. But if you actually stop and look, the intro is stacked. It contains background art decisions, character-specific visual choices, and small self-aware jokes that have been quietly accumulating across the show's different visual eras. The people who work on the show's animation clearly regard the opening sequence as a space for low-key creative indulgence, a canvas that the audience will technically see in every episode but will rarely look at directly. The opening credits of Family Guy are, by themselves, a small museum of hidden details. Over the years, the sequence has gone through subtle variations, adjusting for new cast additions, reflecting storyline changes, and occasionally slipping in visual jokes that the animators clearly intended for a small and attentive audience. Most people see the opening as a kind of ceremonial formality, the thing you're obligated to sit through before the actual show starts. But if you pay attention to it the way the people who made it seem to have intended, you find that it is layered in ways that go well beyond music and dancing. Easter egg number 11. The intro sequence changes its background details across seasons. The opening sequence has been updated multiple times across the show's run to reflect changes in the main cast and the world of the show. But the changes are subtle enough that most casual viewers never caught them in real time. When Cleveland Brown was written out of the show to anchor the Cleveland Show spin-off in 2009, his presence in the opening sequence was quietly adjusted. When James Woods made recurring appearances on the show, a version of the opening existed during his run that included small references in the background art that would have been easy to miss at normal playback speed. Eagle-eyed fans have cataloged multiple versions of the opening across different seasons, and comparing them side by side reveals a kind of visual history of the show's cast changes that the actual episodes never explicitly announced. Easter egg number 12. Stewie's building blocks in the opening spell out something specific. In the opening sequence, there is a brief shot of baby Stewie playing with alphabet blocks. Fans who have slowed the footage down notice that the blocks in front of him are arranged to spell out a specific word or phrase. Different versions of this detail have circulated online over the years, with fans debating exactly what the blocks say in different airings. What is undisputed is that the blocks are not randomly arranged, they were deliberately set to spell something by the animation team. The fact that it passes by quickly enough to be invisible at normal speed makes it a classic blink-and-miss-it plant, a detail that rewards the frame-by-frame viewer while meaning nothing to the person just waiting for the show to start. Easter egg number 13. The Family Guy theme was composed by Walter Murphy, who also worked with the Bee Gees. Walter Murphy is the composer behind the Family Guy theme, but before he ever wrote a note for an animated sitcom, Murphy was a session musician and arranger who worked extensively in popular music. He is perhaps best known for a 1976 disco hit called A Fifth of Beethoven, which took the opening theme of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and transformed it into a piece of disco music that became a genuine chart hit. He also collaborated with the Bee Gees during their peak years. When you hear the Family Guy theme, all those big band horns, that jazzy, slightly retro bounce, you are hearing the output of a man who spent years in the music industry before Seth MacFarlane brought him into the world of animation. Murphy's fingerprints on the show's sound are extensive. He composed the underscore for enormous portions of the early seasons. Easter egg number 14. The first episode originally aired twice before its official premiere. Most accounts of Family Guy's history say it premiered on the 31st of January 1999, after the Super Bowl. But a rough cut of the episode actually aired on the 20th of December 1998, a full 6 weeks earlier on Fox. This version was unfinished. It had placeholder music in certain scenes, incomplete credits, and the lip sync was noticeably off in several places. A significant portion of the audience who saw it that December likely had no idea they were watching something that wasn't the final product. The clean, finished version is what aired after the Super Bowl. The December broadcast is a strange little artifact in the show's history, the moment that technically makes its premiere date contested, depending on how you define premiere. Easter egg number 15. Meg's original voice actor was replaced after the first season without an on-screen announcement. Lacey Chabert voiced Meg Griffin during the first season of the broadcast show. Her final episode as Meg was Holy Crap, which is now marketed as the second episode of Season 2. After that, Mila Kunis took over and has voiced the character ever since. The transition was never addressed in show. No episode ever explained it or called attention to it. If you watch the show in the original broadcast order and pay close attention to Meg's voice across the first 2 seasons, you can hear the shift. Chabert's Meg has a slightly different energy, a bit more overtly teenage and flustered in a specific way. Kunis brought her own interpretation to the character and eventually made the role entirely her own, but the changeover happened silently, and Chabert's contribution to the show is often overlooked in retrospective discussions of the cast. Easter egg number 16. Tom Tucker's son Jake has an upside-down face, and the show never explained why. Tom Tucker is the local news anchor in Quahog. He has a son named Jake, who appears occasionally across the series. Jake Tucker has a face that is, for reasons the show never addresses or explains, entirely upside down. His eyes are at the bottom, his mouth is at the top, and everything about his face is geometrically inverted relative to how a human face works. Other characters sometimes remark on this. Jake himself seems to accept it as a basic feature of his existence. The joke is purely surreal. It exists because someone decided it would be funnier to never explain it than to offer a premise for why this child looks the way he does. In the rare moments when the camera shows Jake Tucker prominently, it is genuinely disorienting in a way that the show seems to enjoy. Easter egg number 17. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery's design references a real New England beer brand. After leaving the toy factory, Peter Griffin goes to work at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. This is another Rhode Island-coded detail. The Pawtucket Red Sox, now the Worcester Red Sox, were a real minor league baseball team based in Pawtucket that showed up in the show. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale itself is drawn to resemble brands like Samuel Adams and other New England craft and regional beers, with that particular blend of colonial imagery and hearty American messaging on the label. The brewery setting gave the writers a workplace environment that allowed for episodes built around beer, labor, politics, and the texture of blue-collar New England life, which is the cultural substrate from which the show was built in the first place. Easter egg number 18. A prototype version of Cleveland Brown appears in the first episode before the real Cleveland does. This one is genuinely strange when you find it. In the very first episode, Death Has a Shadow, there is an early courtroom scene. If you look at the background, you can spot a character sitting next to Quagmire, who looks almost but not quite like Cleveland Brown. The character has a receding hairline, a slightly different mustache shape, and is voiced by Phil Lamar rather than Mike Henry, who would eventually make Cleveland his own. This proto-Cleveland appears before the actual Cleveland makes his proper introduction in the same scene. No one has ever fully explained whether this was an animation error, an oversight, or a deliberate placeholder put there while the character's design was still being finalized. Whatever the reason, both a prototype and the final version of Cleveland Brown appear within minutes of each other in the show's very first episode. Easter egg number 19. Seth MacFarlane's sister Rachel voices several characters across the series. Seth MacFarlane's sister, Rachel MacFarlane, has appeared as a voice actor in Family Guy at various points across the show's run. In the original pitch pilot, she voiced Meg. In the broadcast show, she has provided voices for background characters and guest characters over the years. It is a quiet family footnote, the show that Seth built from his thesis film and his memories of art school and Rhode Island contains his sister's voice hidden in various places across its run. This kind of real-world family overlap is rarely discussed in mainstream coverage of the show, which tends to focus on the main cast, but it is a meaningful thread connecting the show's production to MacFarlane's actual personal history. Easter egg number 20. The show acknowledges its own production codes in meta-jokes. Family Guy has always had a self-aware streak, but one of the more specific and obscure examples of this is the show occasionally referencing the internal mechanics of television production in ways that casual viewers would never parse. Production codes, the naming conventions of writers' rooms, the process by which episodes get numbered and cataloged, these have all shown up as background details or throwaway references in various episodes, put there by the writers for the benefit of the small audience of television industry people who watch the show. It is the comedy equivalent of a musician hiding a musical in-joke inside a chord progression, something that lands on a completely different level for the person who knows what they're looking at. Section 3. Eggs 21 through 30. Background details that reward patience. The animators who work on Family Guy are producing an enormous amount of content per season. Each episode requires thousands of individual frames, hundreds of background paintings, and an entire designed world that needs to feel consistent from scene to scene. Given the scale of that production, it would be completely reasonable, and nobody would ever know if the backgrounds were filled with generic placeholder art, generic labels on store shelves, non-specific text on signs, nondescript book spines with no titles. Most animated shows at this volume of output do exactly that. But Family Guy's production design team, across most of the show's history, chose to fill those backgrounds with actual content. They wrote actual titles on those book spines. They put actual text on those signs. They made the backgrounds of Quahog readable rather than decorative, and then trusted that someone, eventually, would read them. That trust in the audience is what makes the following Easter eggs possible. There is a specific kind of pleasure that comes from pausing a piece of media and finding something there. It is the feeling of being let in on something of the person who made the thing, silently acknowledging that you were paying close enough attention to find what they left behind. Family Guy's writers and animators have been doing this for the entire run of the show. They put things in backgrounds. They write on walls that are in frame for half a second. They put book titles on shelves that no character ever references. They fill the world of Quahog with visual information that the camera never draws your attention to, because if they drew attention to it, it would stop being an Easter egg and become a joke that they'd already telegraphed. Easter egg number 21. Jesus' car has a license plate reading WWID. In a cutaway episode involving a fake movie trailer parody, a fictional Christ figure appears driving a car. The trailer goes by fast enough that most viewers would miss the license plate entirely. But if you stop on it, the plate reads WWID, standing for What Would I Do? It is a riff on the What Would Jesus Do moral branding that was popular in the early 2000s, twisted to put the perspective in Jesus' own mouth. It is a quick, quiet pun that requires the viewer to catch the plate, read it, and then work backward through the abbreviation, all in a window of maybe 2 seconds of screen time. The joke rewards the attentive viewer and passes completely unnoticed by everyone else. Easter egg number 22. A TV guide in one episode carries a secret message under Luke Perry's photo. In an early episode where Peter is trying to find content for the school newspaper and ends up with a TV guide, the magazine falls open to a page featuring Luke Perry. In the broadcast version of this episode, if you pause on the magazine, Family Guy is on the air. It is the show acknowledging its own existence and its own survival, a kind of quiet celebration buried in something that the camera treats as a throwaway prop. This is exactly the kind of joke that would have been invisible to the 22 million people who watched that episode live. It was put there for the people who would later own the DVD and sit quietly in their rooms, pausing on things. Easter egg number 23. Stewie Griffin. The Untold Stories DVD cover appears at the Griffin family yard sale. In a Season 4 episode featuring a Griffin family yard sale, the camera pans across a table of items that Brian is selling. Among the junk on the table, if you look carefully, you can spot the DVD cover for Stewie Griffin. The Untold Story, the direct-to-DVD special that the show had released in 2005. The yard sale episode appears to have aired around the same time as the special's release, which makes this either a piece of self-promotion disguised as a background detail, or a self-aware joke about the Griffin family trying to get rid of merchandise from their own lives. Either reading works, and that ambiguity is part of what makes the detail satisfying. Easter egg number 24. The model misbehavior newspaper joke is designed specifically to punish you for finding it. In the Season 4 episode, Model Misbehavior, the Griffin family wins a boat race and ends up on the front page of the local newspaper. When Lois holds up the paper, the headline reads, "Lower Middle Class Family Wins Regatta." And below that, in smaller text that is only visible if you pause the DVD or a streaming version, there is a second headline that reads, "DVDs paused for headline, joke millions disappointed." The show knew that fans would find this. They planned for it. And instead of rewarding those fans with something clever or funny, the writers deliberately made the reward the discovery of the joke's own failure. You went looking for something interesting. You found a note telling you that you should not have expected anything interesting. It is petty and absurd and deeply funny in a way that you only understand if you were the person who just wasted a minute trying to read a fictional newspaper. Easter egg number 25. The Foreign Affairs episode contains a dig at American Dad's newspaper gag. American Dad, the other animated show that Seth MacFarlane created, has a recurring joke built into its opening title sequence, where newspaper headlines scroll across the screen with absurdist punchlines. It became something of a signature for that show. In the Family Guy episode Foreign Affairs, the camera briefly passes over a newspaper, and if you stop on the front page, the headline reads, "Newspaper gag fails to live up to expectations." It is Family Guy making a joke at its sibling show's expense, acknowledging American Dad's newspaper bit and dismissing it in the same breath. The detail is invisible unless you pause, at which point it becomes a small act of inter-franchise sibling rivalry. Easter egg number 26. The background books in Brian's study contain real titles with jokes built into them. Brian Griffin presents himself as a literary dog. He drinks martinis. He talks about literature. He has a half-finished novel that the show returns to periodically as a symbol of his aspirations outpacing his discipline. Fittingly, when the camera captures Brian in his space, there are bookshelves behind him. And the books on those shelves are not random. Writers for the show have placed real-seeming book titles on those spines. Titles that work as jokes if you read them, titles that fit the character's pretentious self-image, and titles that occasionally contain hidden commentary on the episode being told. These details are invisible in the normal rhythm of watching the show. They are designed for the viewer who freezes the image and spends a moment in Brian's imaginary library. Easter egg number 27. In Back to the Pilot, the characters in the background of the original episode are aware. They're in a cutaway. In the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, Brian and Stewie travel back in time to the first episode, Death Has a Shadow, using Stewie's time machine. While they're there, they observe the events of the pilot from the outside. In a specific sequence, they watch a cutaway gag from that episode, and the characters in the background of the cutaway, the people who have nothing to do while the joke plays out, are shown standing around in obvious, uncomfortable silence, just waiting for it to be over. The The show is making a joke about its own structure, the fact that when a cutaway happens, everyone in the scene technically has to stop existing and stand there with nothing to do until the show returns. It is self-critical humor from a show that was increasingly aware of what critics said about its cutaway dependency. Easter egg number 28. Lois's Facebook page shows that Meg's friend request has gone unanswered. In a later season episode where Lois is shown using Facebook, the show's animators included a realistic mock-up of a Facebook profile rather than a generic placeholder. If you pause on Lois's screen, among the visible interface elements, you can see that Meg Griffin has sent Lois a friend request, and Lois has not accepted it. The request is just sitting there, pending. The joke operates on two levels. It is a visual representation of a running gag about the family's treatment of Meg, and it is also a genuinely mundane piece of family behavior. The kind of thing where a parent is simply slow to engage with a social media platform and a teenager's request keeps getting overlooked. The animators did not need to add this detail. They chose to, because the specificity of it is what makes it land. Easter egg number 29. The evil monkey. In Chris's closet was shown on a hidden detail to have a personal life. The evil monkey, who lived in Chris Griffin's bedroom closet and pointed at him menacingly for several seasons, was one of the show's most beloved recurring gags. But in the episode Model Misbehavior, after the Griffin family leaves the house, there is a brief shot of what the evil monkey does when no one is home. He is lying on Chris's bed wearing headphones, listening to Foghat's Slow Ride on a vinyl record, and smoking a joint. This detail passes by quickly and serves no story purpose. It is purely a background character moment, a gift to the attentive viewer that fills in a corner of the evil monkey's life that the show never needed to address. The choice of Slow Ride in particular is excellent. It is exactly the song you would expect a creature of the evil monkey's general vibe to be relaxing to in private. Easter egg number 30. The Simpsons crossover episode contains several second screen jokes that most people missed. The Simpsons crossover episode The Simpsons Guy from Season 13 is packed with references and meta-humor that operates on multiple layers. But some of the most interesting material exists in the backgrounds, in signs, on chalkboards, and in the texture of Springfield itself as depicted through the Family Guy art style. The crossover was unusual because it required the Family Guy team to draw Springfield's locations using their own animation workflow, which meant every building and background detail had to be reconstructed from scratch. In doing so, the animators seeded the backgrounds with Family Guy-specific jokes tucked inside Springfield's geography, details that only make sense if you know both shows well, and that only appear if you slow down enough to read what's on the walls. Section 4. Eggs 31. Through 40, the character details that most people overlooked. Character is where the show's most durable Easter eggs live. The visual backgrounds are fun, and the production history is interesting, but the details that tend to stick with people longest are the ones about the characters themselves, the small continuity threads, the production decisions that shaped who these people are, and the specific real-world influences that went into the voices and personalities of the Griffin family and their neighbors. What follows are the character-level details that most people watching Family Guy in a casual context would have no reason to know, but that change how you hear these characters once you're aware of them. Every character in Family Guy carries more history than any single episode tends to reveal. The show has been running long enough that its characters have accumulated pasts, quirks, and contradictions that require a fairly detailed knowledge of the whole series to appreciate. Some of the most interesting Easter eggs in the show are not visual jokes hidden in backgrounds, but rather character continuity details, moments where something in a later episode quietly refers back to something established several seasons earlier, in a way that rewards the long-term viewer without ever being spelled out for the casual one. Easter egg number 31. Peter's voice was based on a real security guard from Rhode Island School of Design. This has already been touched on, but it deserves more time. Seth MacFarlane has described, in various interviews and DVD commentaries, the specific moment he overheard this security guard speaking. The cadence, the confidence, the particular way the man placed emphasis within sentences, all of it went directly into Peter Griffin. What is interesting about this as an Easter egg is what it implies. Every time Peter makes a specific verbal choice, every time he delivers a line with that specific kind of blunt, unfussy Rhode Island working-class energy, you are hearing an echo of someone who has no idea they exist inside a character that has now been on television for more than 25 years. The security guard at Rhode Island School of Design became one of the most influential voices in animated television without ever knowing it. Easter egg number 32. Stewie's voice is based on Rex Harrison's performance in My Fair Lady. Seth MacFarlane based Stewie's voice and vocal cadence on Rex Harrison's performance as Henry Higgins in the 1964 film My Fair Lady. Harrison played Higgins with that specific aristocratic English precision, clipped vowels, clean consonants, an air of barely concealed contempt for anyone who didn't meet his standards, and MacFarlane translated that energy into a baby. What makes this more interesting as a detail is the irony of it. Rex Harrison's Henry Higgins is a man obsessed with teaching others how to speak properly. Stewie Griffin is a baby who uses that same vocal register to discuss plans for world domination and matricide. The formal precision of the voice against the content of what Stewie actually says was the central comedy engine of those early seasons. MacFarlane has also noted that he drew from the tonal quality of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, particularly the lower, more sinister register that Burns occupies when he is at his most menacing. So Stewie's voice is a synthesis, the surface politeness and precision of a particular kind of English aristocrat, underlaid with the specific darkness of a character type that The Simpsons had established as effective for an animated villain. The two sources are recognizable separately, but blended together they produce something that feels entirely original. That originator quality is part of what made early Stewie so striking. He sounded like nobody else on television, because nobody else had thought to combine those two specific influences in that specific way and put them inside a baby. Easter egg number 33. Brian's speaking voice is Seth MacFarlane's actual speaking voice. This is one of the most discussed quirks of the show for dedicated fans, but it remains unknown to many casual viewers. Brian Griffin is the only main character Seth MacFarlane voices using his natural speaking voice. Peter, Stewie, Quagmire, and Tom Tucker all involve MacFarlane adopting specific vocal character choices. Brian speaks in MacFarlane's own register, his own rhythm. Writers have noted over the years that Brian's political views, his aesthetic sensibilities, his sense of intellectual aspiration, all of these map pretty directly onto Seth MacFarlane himself. Brian is, in a meaningful sense, the show's portrait of its own creator, which gives all of Brian's flaws and weaknesses across the later seasons an odd biographical quality if you think about it too long. Easter egg number 34. Quagmire's voice was based on the energy of 1950s lounge culture. Glenn Quagmire's vocal character, that slightly manic, enthusiastic, slightly retro energy, was MacFarlane's interpretation of a certain kind of mid-century American bachelor archetype. The easy-listening radio announcer, the smooth-talking lounge singer, the guy in a leisure suit who has memorized every pickup line ever written and deployed them without embarrassment or doubt. Quagmire's voice draws from that specific period aesthetic, which is part of why the character doesn't quite sound like anyone else on the show. He exists in a kind of permanent 1958 in terms of vocal energy, and the contrast between that energy and the contemporary world around him is part of what makes his character work even when the writing around him doesn't. Easter egg number 35. Joe Swanson's first episode established something about his character that the show later quietly contradicted. Joe Swanson was introduced in the first season episode, A Hero Sits Next Door, and the episode's entire premise was that Peter was jealous of Joe because Joe was the cool, capable new neighbor who everyone admired. Peter wanted to be liked the way Joe was liked. This jealousy drove the episode's plot. It established Joe as someone whose community standing Peter found threatening. In later seasons, this dynamic quietly inverted itself. Joe became the one who was mocked and diminished, and the show's memory of the original dynamic largely evaporated. The episode title itself, A Hero Sits Next Door, reads as ironic in retrospect, because the show eventually treated Joe in ways that bore almost no resemblance to the character that title celebrated. Easter egg number 36. Herbert the Pervert was originally intended as a one-time background character. Mike Henry created Herbert the Pervert, voiced him, and based the character's appearance and vocal quality on an elderly man he had encountered while working in a grocery store. Herbert first appeared in the third season episode To Love and Die in Dixie, and was, according to Henry, not conceived as a recurring character at all. The initial plan was for Herbert to appear as a small joke, one of those character types the show introduces, gets its laugh from, and moves on from. But the audience response was strong enough that the writers kept finding reasons to bring him back, and Herbert gradually expanded into a recurring presence with his own history, including a World War II backstory and membership in the Skull and Bones secret society. The fact that one of the show's most memorable secondary characters was nearly a one-off background gag says something about how organic the development of this show's world could be in its better years. Easter egg number 37. In the episode Petergeist, Herbert saves Chris's life, and it's easy to miss how significant that is. Herbert's relationship with Chris exists almost entirely in the register of uncomfortable comedy, but the episode Petergeist in Season 4 contains something that complicates that reading. During the episode's haunted house storyline, an evil tree in the Griffin backyard grabs Chris and begins pulling him towards some kind of supernatural danger. Herbert intervenes and saves Chris from being absorbed by the tree. He does it without being asked. He does it in a moment that the show plays relatively straight. For a character who exists primarily as a vehicle for dark comedic discomfort, this is a moment of genuine action and protection, and because the show doesn't dwell on it or call attention to it, most viewers experience it as a background beat and move on. But it is there. Easter egg number 38. The evil monkey had a tragic backstory revealed in Season 8. The evil monkey spent Seasons 6, 7, and the early part of the show's post-revival run being a one-note gag. He lived in the closet, he pointed at Chris, Chris was scared, the joke repeated. But in Season 8, the episode Road to the Multiverse contained a brief flashback revealing that the evil monkey had once been a cheerful, non-evil monkey with a wife. His wife left him for another monkey, and the heartbreak is what turned him evil and sent him to live in a child's closet, pointing menacingly at the child inside. It is an absurd origin story, but the show treats the flashback with something approaching gentleness, a soft sadness for a creature who was radically altered by loss. The monkey who terrified Chris across multiple seasons was a grieving creature. That is an Easter egg you can't unsee once you've seen it. And there is something genuinely moving, if you let it be, about the evil monkey's situation. Here is a being who experienced heartbreak and processed it by finding the most isolated corner of a stranger's house and making that space his. Chris thought he had a monster in his closet. What he actually had was a creature who had lost something and didn't know where else to go. The fact that this is played entirely for comedy doesn't stop it from being, at its core, a story about grief and displacement. Easter egg number 39. Dr. Hartman mentions an attempt to clone a chicken, which retroactively explains Ernie. In the Season 9 episode New Kidney in Town, while discussing Peter's medical situation, Dr. Hartman casually mentions that he once tried to clone a chicken, and the result was a man-sized, hostile chicken, which he describes before the conversation moves on to something else. The show does not pause to connect this to Ernie the giant chicken. It doesn't need to. The connection is simply there if you're listening a throwaway line from a bumbling doctor that, if taken seriously, would suggest that Ernie the giant chicken is not a naturally occurring entity but a cloning experiment gone wrong. Whether the writers intended this as Ernie's official origin, or just a coincidental overlap that they decided to let sit without confirmation, the implication has circulated in fan discussions ever since the episode aired. Easter egg number 40. Adam West, playing himself as Mayor, created a recursive pop culture loop that the show acknowledged. Adam West, the actor most famous for playing Batman in the original 1966 television series, voiced a fictionalized version of himself as Mayor Adam West for the entire run of Family Guy until his death in 2017. This created a strange recursive situation. A real person was playing a fictional version of himself in an animated show, and that fictional version of himself was a public official in a made-up town. The show occasionally made jokes about this loop referencing West's Batman career, having Mayor West act in ways that nodded to the Batman persona, and in one Halloween episode, dressing Mayor West as Catman, which is itself a reference to the character Adam West, voiced in The Fairly OddParents, a completely different animated show. There is a layer of meta-textual comedy baked into every Mayor Adam West appearance that the show rarely explains and seems to assume the viewer will either follow or not. Section 5. Eggs 41 through 50. The Giant Chicken, Star Wars, and the show's wildest hidden lore. You could build an entire separate program just cataloging the hidden details inside Family Guy's two biggest creative landmarks, the Giant Chicken mythology and the Star Wars parody trilogy. Both of these are the kinds of creative projects that attract the most dedicated fan analysis, partly because they are so large and so layered that they generate new discoveries years after they air. The giant chicken fights are so kinetic and so dense with choreographic detail that even viewers who have rewatched them dozens of times occasionally notice something new, a background gag, a callback to a specific earlier moment, a piece of environmental storytelling in the destruction patterns. And the Star Wars episodes were produced with a level of attention to the source material that rewarded deep knowledge of the original films in ways that casual Star Wars fans and casual Family Guy fans could both appreciate at different levels. Some Easter eggs in Family Guy are the quiet, blink and miss it kind, the book spine on Brian's shelf, the small text under a newspaper photo, but others are large and architecturally complex, buried inside the show's biggest creative swings. The elaborate Star Wars parodies, the mythology surrounding the giant chicken, the structural decisions embedded in multi-part episodes. These are the Easter eggs that require not just a pause button, but a familiarity with the show's whole history to fully appreciate. Easter egg number 41. The feud between Peter and Ernie the giant chicken started over an expired coupon. The giant chicken fights are among the most elaborate recurring set pieces in the show's history. Long, action movie-styled brawls that take Peter and Ernie through entire cityscapes, causing massive collateral damage while the show's actual plot sits frozen waiting for them to finish. The fights are so grand and so detailed that viewers new to the show often assume there must be some deep mythological explanation for the feud. The truth, revealed in the second season episode Da Boom, is that Ernie the giant chicken once gave Peter a coupon, and the coupon was expired. Peter's reaction to the expired coupon was to attack the chicken. The chicken defended itself. And from that moment forward, the two of them have been engaged in this ongoing, catastrophic, and completely disproportionate rivalry. The absurd smallness of the origin against the enormous scale of every fight that followed is the entire point. The show was making a structural argument with those fights, a visual demonstration of how petty grievances escalate through stubbornness and pride until they bear no relationship to their original cause. That is not an unusual observation about the human condition, but the show had the wit to dramatize it through an actual giant chicken and a man who would fight that chicken through sewers and subway stations and the side of a moving airplane because of a coupon. The Easter egg is the origin itself, buried 2 seasons before anyone knew why the fights were happening, sitting quietly in the continuity of the show as the seed of something that would become one of the most visually elaborate recurring gags in animated television history. Easter egg number 42. The third giant chicken fight ended with Peter and Ernie going to dinner and a new fight starting because of the bill. In internal affairs, the third full giant chicken fight ends differently than the others. After their usual destructive path through Quahog, Peter and Ernie, battered and exhausted, decide to stop fighting. They are tired of it. They have forgotten, in the heat of the moment, what they were even fighting about. Ernie takes Peter out for dinner with his wife, Nicole. And this is actually the scene where Ernie's name is given. His wife uses it over dinner. For a brief window, there is peace. Then, as the bill arrives at the end of the meal, both Peter and Ernie insist on paying for it. The insistence escalates. The fight resumes. Their entire reconciliation was undone by the specific social ritual of who picks up a dinner check. It is both a commentary on male stubbornness and a perfect encapsulation of the show's approach to cyclical conflict. Easter egg number 43. Blue Harvest was the real working title used to disguise Return of the Jedi during filming. When Family Guy titled its Season 6 premiere, the first of the Star Wars parody episodes Blue Harvest, the name seemed random. It has nothing to do with Star Wars. There is no Blue Harvest in the saga. But Blue Harvest was the actual, real-world cover name that George Lucas's production company used while filming Return of the Jedi in the early 1980s. Because the sets were large and invisible locations, and because Star Wars had become such a massive cultural phenomenon that reporters and fans would descend on any known filming location, Lucasfilm circulated a fake title for the project. T-shirts, hats, and crew gear were all printed with Blue Harvest, Horror Beyond Imagination as a decoy. The McFarlane production chose Blue Harvest as the title for their first Star Wars parody because they knew their audience knew the story, and the title was itself a Star Wars Easter egg before the episode even began. Easter egg number 44. The Blue Harvest episode has only one cutaway gag, which was an intentional creative decision. Family Guy episodes in the post-revival era typically contain multiple cutaway gags per episode. The Blue Harvest premiere, despite being a feature-length episode, contains only a single cutaway. This was a deliberate choice. The Star Wars parody was structured as a narrative-first piece of television, a story being retold by Peter to his family during a power outage, with the frame of the show providing context. The writers made the decision that keeping the episode's cutaway count to a minimum would make it feel more cinematic, more committed to the parody format, and would separate it structurally from the show's usual approach. It was one of the cleaner creative choices made during that period, and the episode is often praised for its construction in ways that the standard episodes of the same era sometimes are not. Easter egg number 45. The Star Destroyer in the Blue Harvest opening has a Bush Cheney campaign bumper sticker. In the opening of Blue Harvest, when the Star Destroyer is shown bearing down on the Rebel ship in a recreation of A New Hope's famous opening sequence, the underside of the Star Destroyer has a Bush Cheney 2004 campaign bumper sticker on it. The shot goes by quickly, the sticker is small relative to the ship, and you would have to know to look for it. This was the writers equating the Galactic Empire with the political administration that was current when the episode was in production. Whether you agreed with the sentiment or not, the specificity of the bumper sticker, a 04 campaign sticker, not a generic political statement, made it a time-stamped object of commentary that a portion of the audience would only catch on a second or third viewing. Easter egg number 46. Bender from Futurama, Roger from American Dad, and the Evil Monkey all appear in the Mos Eisley Cantina scene. When the Blue Harvest episode reaches its version of the Mos Eisley Cantina scene, the alien bar from A New Hope, the show fills the background with a selection of alien patrons that includes characters from other animated shows and from Family Guy itself. Bender from Futurama is visible at one point in the background. Roger, the alien from American Dad, is also there. Coach John McGuirk from Home Movies, another animated series, makes an appearance. And the Evil Monkey from Chris's Closet is also somewhere in the cantina if you look for him. This kind of background cameo stacking is a visual reward for animation fans, who can recognize the characters as a signal that the people making the episode thought of the cantina as a natural gathering place for animated characters from all over the Fox and Adult Swim landscape. Easter egg number 47. The second Star Wars parody's title references a specific Darth Vader moment most fans forgot. The second entry in the trilogy, Something 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 Dark Side, takes its title from Vader's line in The Empire Strikes Back, where he tries to articulate a temptation toward the dark side in a monologue that famously trails off. It is not one of the most quoted Vader lines. It does not have the cultural weight of, "I am your father," or "I find your lack of faith disturbing." It is a specific, slightly obscure choice that rewards viewers who know the Empire Strikes Back dialogue well enough to place the reference. The title works on multiple levels. As a reference to the specific film being parodied, as a callback to a specific moment in that film, and as a Family Guy joke about the nature of incomplete sentences, which is itself a kind of comedic structure the show has used throughout its run. Easter egg number 48. The robot chicken jab at the end of Blue Harvest was Seth MacFarlane's response to a real rivalry. At the conclusion of Blue Harvest, Chris Griffin accuses Peter of ripping off the Robot Chicken Star Wars special, another animated Star Wars parody that Seth Green's production company had released. Peter responds by saying he is not a fan of Robot Chicken. This was the show commenting on a real production overlap and real-world creative rivalry between two shows that had independently decided to parody the same source material at roughly the same time. Seth Green was an actor on Family Guy. He voiced Chris Griffin and also ran Robot Chicken with Matthew Senreich. The fact that the show inserted this jab at the very end of Blue Harvest, directly through the mouth of the character voiced by Seth Green, is a layer of self-aware casting comedy that makes the scene work on at least 3 different levels. Easter egg number 49. In Meet the Quagmires, Peter's time travel inadvertently creates the reason Ernie gave him the bad coupon. Meet the Quagmires is a time travel episode in which Peter goes back to the 1980s and disrupts the timeline of his past. While there, he accidentally punches Ernie the giant chicken during a dance at Enchantment Under the Sea. The show had previously established in Da Boom that the feud between Peter and Ernie began when Ernie gave Peter an expired coupon. Meet the Quagmires retroactively explains why Ernie gave him the bad coupon. It was because Peter punched him first during the time travel incident, which gave Ernie 15 years of built-up anger that he expressed through the coupon. This means Peter's feud with the giant chicken is a causal loop. Peter's time travel created the condition that led to the fight, which led to the time travel being possible in the episode where the origin is established. It is a small, closed circle of narrative logic embedded in what most people remember as a fairly lightweight comedy episode. Easter egg number 50. The giant chicken has a wife. Named Nicole, a son, and a preschool kid referenced in background dialogue. Over the course of the giant chicken's appearances, the show has gradually assembled a surprisingly detailed personal biography for a character who exists primarily to fight Peter Griffin. His wife's name is Nicole, introduced in the third fight when Ernie takes Peter to dinner. In Yug Yilimov, a Stewie-centric episode from season 11, Stewie casually mentions that Ernie has a kid in his preschool. In a much later episode, a son of Ernie's named Nugget appears in a dating show context. These details have accumulated without any single episode ever sitting down to present them as significant. The giant chicken has a family. He has a community. He has a social life outside of his catastrophic violence with Peter. This makes him, in a strange way, one of the more fully realized secondary characters in the show's world, and almost none of it was ever the focus of any episode. Section 6, Eggs 51 through 60. The show's relationship with film and television. What separates Family Guy from most animated comedies is not its format or its characters, but its relationship to the archive. The show assumes a level of cultural literacy in its audience that most network television programs in the late 1990s and early 2000s would not have dared to take for granted. It makes jokes that require you to know specific films, specific moments in those films, specific sound effects from those films, and specific people from the industry that made those films. And then it buries additional layers of reference inside those jokes for the subset of the audience that knows even more. The Easter eggs in this section are the ones where that second and third layer of reference becomes visible, where the joke you already knew had a joke inside it that you may have missed. Family Guy has always been deeply in love with Hollywood. Not just as a target for parody, though, that is certainly part of it, but as a reference point, a shared language, and a context for the show's own place in the culture. Some of the most rewarding Easter eggs in the show are not about characters or geography, but about the show's awareness of its own position in the landscape of American film and television, and the specific ways it has chosen to comment on that position. Easter egg number 51. The Wilhelm scream appears multiple times across different episodes. The Wilhelm scream is a stock sound effect, a specific, distinctive human scream that has appeared in hundreds of Hollywood films and television shows since the 1950s. Sound designers and film enthusiasts have made a running game of spotting it across decades of movies. Star Wars uses it, Indiana Jones uses it, Lord of the Rings uses it. Family Guy has inserted the Wilhelm scream into multiple episodes at different points across its run, always in moments of sudden injury or surprise, where a scream would naturally appear in the soundtrack. For the audience that recognizes it, each appearance is a small wink from the sound department. For everyone else, it is just a scream. Easter egg number 52. The Brian Does Hollywood episode hides real Family Guy composers in a fake award show. In the Season 2 episode Brian Does Hollywood, Brian travels to Los Angeles and ends up working in adult films. Near the end of the episode, there is a sequence at an adult film awards ceremony. Ron Jeremy, an actual adult film industry figure, presents the award for Best Original Score in an adult film. The nominees listed for the award include Ron Jones and Walter Murphy, both of whom are actual composers who worked on Family Guy's music. They are also joined on the nominee list by John Williams, the legendary composer behind Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Harry Potter, and countless others. The joke is that John Williams, of all people, is competing for this specific award in this specific context. This level of composer-specific in-joke only lands for the portion of the audience that knows enough about film and television music to recognize why John Williams appearing on that nominee list is absurd. Easter egg number 53. The show snuck in a crossover cameo between Roger from American Dad and Bender from Futurama, before either network encouraged it. The Mos Eisley Cantina scene in Blue Harvest is the most visible example of this, but it is not the only time the show has placed characters from other animated properties into Family Guy frames without drawing attention to it. The creative staff at McFarlane's production company had working relationships with people at Futurama and other Fox animated properties, and these relationships occasionally found expression in brief, unauthorized feeling cameos that existed in backgrounds or crowd scenes rather than as anything the show promoted or explained. These appearances feel more like private jokes between production crews than official crossover events. Easter egg number 54. The show's relationship with Fox News was encoded in background details long before MacFarlane went public about his frustrations. For years before Seth MacFarlane publicly expressed discomfort with Family Guy airing on Fox, which shares corporate history with Fox News, the show's writers were encoding low-level commentary about this relationship in background signs, news tickers, and throwaway references. The Fox News ticker has appeared in episodes with clearly satirical headlines visible for a few seconds. Signs in the background of newsroom scenes have commented obliquely on the network's programming philosophy. These details function as exactly the kind of commentary that would slide past network standards and practices review because they are not literally addressed by any character and disappear before anyone could be certain they saw them. Easter egg number 55. Road to the Multiverse contains a Disney universe where everything looks like a classic Disney film. In the Season 8 episode Road to the Multiverse, Brian and Stewie travel between parallel universes. One of these universes has been rendered in a style that directly imitates the aesthetic of classic Walt Disney animated films, rounded, colorful, sweet, with a musical sensibility that matches that tradition. In this universe, Herbert the Pervert appears as a parody of the evil queen from Snow White. The visual joke is that even the show's darkest and most uncomfortable recurring character becomes aesthetically cute and harmless when filtered through the Disney animation style. The joke operates on aesthetic contrast, the same disturbing character concept rendered in a style so opposite to the show's usual register that the effect is genuinely surreal. Easter egg number 56. The Simpsons crossover fight scene contains a specific reference to Simpsons Emmy history. When Peter and Homer Griffin's fight begins in The Simpsons Guy, the brawl directly mirrors the structure of Peter's fights with Ernie the Giant Chicken, which is itself an explicit meta-joke. But inside that sequence, there is a specific detail about Emmy Awards. Homer is shown throwing Emmy statuettes at Peter during the fight. Peter is unable to throw any back, because he has none. This is the show acknowledging, through physical comedy, that The Simpsons has won far more Emmy Awards than Family Guy. The Simpsons won Outstanding Animated Program repeatedly in its early years and received the Outstanding Comedy Series nomination that Family Guy famously received in 2009. The Emmy detail in the fight is a moment of self-deprecating honesty about where Family Guy stood relative to its older animated sibling in terms of critical recognition. Easter egg number 57. Roger from American Dad appears in the cantina scene and then immediately leaves, because American Dad had just moved off Fox. When Roger, the alien from American Dad, appears in the Blue Harvest cantina scene, he makes brief eye contact with the camera and then immediately turns and walks away. This was a commentary on the fact that American Dad had, at roughly the time this episode was in production, completed its move from Fox to the cable network TBS. Roger's brief appearance and immediate departure was the show acknowledging that Roger no longer belonged in Fox's animated universe the way he once had. He is there for a moment, and then he's gone, because his home network had changed. Easter egg number 58. The Stewie Kills Lois two-parter was designed as a goodbye to the evil Stewie character. The sixth-season two-parter in which Stewie finally follows through on his lifelong goal of killing Lois, and then Lois returns for revenge in the second half, was produced with the understanding that it would serve as a farewell to the original conception of Stewie as a malevolent evil. Genius. The writers and MacFarlane had already decided that Stewie's character was shifting away from world domination and toward a more emotionally complex identity. The two-parter was a deliberate creative gift to the original Stewie, a chance to complete his arc, accomplish his stated goal, and then reset everything through the reveal that it was all a simulation on Stewie's computer. The twist was not just a convenient reset button. It was the writers acknowledging they were retiring a version of the character and choosing to do it through a satisfying narrative rather than simply letting the plot stop appearing. Easter egg number 59. The Brian and Stewie episode has no cutaway gags and is almost entirely dialogue. The Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie locks the two characters in a bank vault overnight and lets them talk. There are no cutaways. There are no random gags. The episode is built almost entirely from extended conversation, much of it genuinely emotional. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box because he has thought about ending his life, and Stewie reveals the depth of his attachment to Brian in response. The episode was, at the time of its airing, among the most praised single episodes the show had produced in years. The absence of cutaways was not accidental or born from scheduling constraints. The writers made the structural choice that this particular story could only exist if the show committed to staying inside the vault with the characters for the entire runtime. What makes this an Easter egg rather than just a well-known fact about the episode is the way the episode hides its ambition inside its apparent simplicity. You settle in expecting Family Guy and receive something that operates more like a chamber. Play 2 characters, 1 room, a long night, the slow revelation of things they would not say in any other setting. The episode trusts its characters in a way that the surrounding seasons often didn't, and that trust is visible in every scene. Brian tells Stewie something that the show would normally diffuse with a joke. Stewie sits with it. No cutaway arrives to break the moment. The show simply stays there with them, which is the rarest and most generous thing it could have done. Easter egg number 60. The show has referenced its own cancellations as a running meta joke more than once. Family Guy was canceled by Fox twice after its 3rd season in 2002, and then briefly again after the 2nd season, when scheduling chaos repeatedly dropped the ratings. The show's eventual return in 2005 after the Adult Swim rerun surge and strong DVD sales became part of the show's mythology, and the writers have referenced it. Multiple episodes contain background details, throwaway lines, or brief sequences that acknowledge the show's cancellation history, sometimes directly, sometimes through characters making oblique references to being removed from the air. There is an episode where a character says something to the effect of, "Family Guy, we've been on for years," with a slight tone of surprise, as if acknowledging that the show's survival was not a given. These self-references accumulate over time into a portrait of a show that remained genuinely aware of its own improbable longevity. Section 7. Eggs 61 through 70 Writer Room Jokes and Production Secrets. Writers' rooms are, in a sense, private communities. The people inside them share references, develop shorthand, build inside jokes that they are aware will never be understood by anyone outside the room, unless those people are paying very close attention to the finished product. Family Guy's writer's room, across its various incarnations over the decades, has left more of this interior culture visible in the finished show than most writers' rooms manage, partly because the show's format, with its cutaway structure and its willingness to put text in backgrounds, creates natural hiding places for material that is not meant to be understood by everyone. The following Easter eggs are the ones that feel most directly rooted in the specific culture of the people who made the show, rather than in the world of pop culture that the show was commenting on. The writer's room of Family Guy has, over the course of the show's history, included dozens of people who worked at different points across different seasons. Some of them stayed for years. Some wrote a handful of episodes and moved on. Some of them left their marks in ways that only people who know the show's production history would recognize. The following Easter eggs are the ones that feel like the most direct expressions of the writer's room's interior culture jokes that were put there for the writers themselves as much as for the audience. Easter egg number 61. Seth MacFarlane has only formally written 3 episodes of Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane created, produces, and voices the main characters of Family Guy. He is the face of the show and the name most associated with it. But he has only formally written 3 episodes across the entire run. Death Has a Shadow, North by North Quahog, the Season 4 premiere, and a segment of the Family Guy viewer mail episode. MacFarlane has participated in story and joke pitching at various points across the show's history, and he has acknowledged that he was involved in some capacity in most episodes through creative oversight. But the formal writing credits belong almost entirely to the show's various writing staffs. This is not widely known. Most casual viewers assume that a show this associated with a specific creator must be primarily written by that creator. The reality of how television writing works is considerably more distributed. Easter egg number 62. The writer's room had a tradition of hiding staff names in background text. Family Guy's writers have, at various points, inserted their own names or the names of colleagues, friends, and production staff into text that appears in the background of scenes. A book title on a shelf. A name on a mailbox. Text on a sign in a public space that the camera passes over without comment. Cherry Sheva Dumrong, one of the show's writers and executive producers, has been referenced in this way in at least one episode, her name appearing in background text during a scene that has nothing to do with her. Finding these insertions is genuinely difficult because it requires knowing the staff credits well enough to recognize the names when they appear in unexpected places. Easter egg number 63. The Holden Caulfield running character was named by staff, not in the show. In a recurring pattern across several episodes, a specific unnamed man appears, who confronts Peter about various things, most notably calling him a big fat phony, and harassing him through the rest of the relevant episode. This character does not have a name given to him in any dialogue, but the writing staff, and eventually a significant portion of the fan community, began referring to him as Holden Caulfield, after the famous protagonist of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, a character defined by his obsessive identification of phoniness in the people around him. The name spread through fan discussion until it became the de facto identity for the character, despite never appearing in the show itself. It is an Easter egg that was supplied by the audience rather than the creators. Easter egg number 64. The episode Foreign Affairs contains a self-referential newspaper headline that mocks American Dad's own self-referential newspaper gag. The show's relationship with its own meta-humor reaches a specific peak in Foreign Affairs, where the newspaper visible in a scene carries the headline, "Newspaper Gag Fails to Live Up to Expectations." This is Family Guy making fun of American dads. Signature bit the scrolling newspaper headlines in that show's opening sequence by putting its own fake newspaper headline in a Family Guy episode that undercuts the entire concept of the newspaper headline joke. It is the show eating its sibling for a laugh in the most specific and self-aware way possible. Easter egg number 65. The DVD versions of certain episodes contain material that didn't air on television, and that changes the Easter egg landscape completely. Family Guy's DVD releases have routinely included extended cuts of episodes, versions that include scenes, jokes, and background details that were cut for time or standards during the broadcast run. In some cases, these extended versions contain Easter eggs that are entirely absent from the broadcast version. The newspaper joke in Model Misbehavior, the DVD's paused for headline joke gag, exists in the DVD version but may not have been visible in the original broadcast. The uncensored DVD cuts of various episodes also occasionally include background text or visual details that were obscured or removed for broadcast. This creates two parallel Easter egg maps for the show, one for broadcast viewers and one for DVD viewers. Easter egg number 66. The show's theme song has an extended version that most viewers have never heard. The theme song you hear at the start of every episode is a shortened version. Walter Murphy composed a more extended arrangement that appeared on the 2005 album Family Guy, Live in Vegas, released on Geffen Records. This album also included new original songs written specifically for it, alongside reworked versions of classic standards interpreted through the big band and Broadway filters that McFarlane and Murphy shared a fondness for. The existence of this extended theme is known primarily to people who bought the album, which was not a mass-market success. For most viewers, the full version of the song is a piece of Family Guy history they have never encountered. Easter egg number 67. The Lewis Griffin Facebook profile was built with functional social media logic. The Facebook scene in a later season episode is more detailed than the show needed it to be. The profile is not a generic placeholder social media interface. It appears to follow the actual logic of Facebook's design, at the time the layout, the menu structure, the specific way friend requests appear as pending items in a queue. Whoever designed that scene clearly looked at an actual Facebook page and reproduced its functionality accurately enough that the Meg friend request, sitting unanswered in Lois's queue, reads as credible rather than approximate. The detail is invisible unless you slow down enough to read the interface, but it is there. Easter egg number 68. Ron Jones, the show's original composer, was let go, and the decision became a source of lasting controversy among fans. Ron Jones composed the underscore for the first 4 seasons of Family Guy, and is widely credited by fans with giving those early seasons much of their specific comedic and emotional texture. His music was layered, varied, and responsive to the specific emotional beats of scenes in ways that the later scoring was often said not to be. Jones was let go before the revival. He later gave an interview where he attributed his dismissal to his music being too good and drawing too much emotional attention at the expense of the jokes. Whether or not that reading is accurate, the shift in the show's musical identity between the original run and the revival is something that fans who have gone back and watched both eras side by side have consistently noted. The specific sound of those first 4 seasons is partly a Ron Jones Easter egg, a quality that exists in the show's DNA from that period and that the later seasons never quite reproduced. Easter egg number 69. Back to the Pilot is a love letter to the first episode that also functions as a structural critique. When Brian and Stewie travel back to Death Has a Shadow in the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, the show reproduces many of the original episode's sets and backgrounds with remarkable fidelity to the original animation style, which was rougher, slightly looser, more hand-drawn feeling than the cleaner animation that followed. By placing the slicker current-era Brian and Stewie inside those early season backgrounds, the episode creates a visual contrast that functions as a kind of love letter to the original aesthetic, while simultaneously demonstrating exactly how much the show's visual language had changed. It is an episode about time travel that is also, visually, an essay about the passage of time in the production of the show itself. Easter egg number 70. The show hit a dig at the Parents Television Council inside a throwaway visual gag. The Parents Television Council filed complaints about Family Guy consistently across its early run and placed the show on their Worst TV Show of the Week list on more than 40 documented occasions. The show was not unaware of this. At various points in the series, background text, throwaway lines, and brief visual gags have made oblique reference to the PTC, usually in ways that require the viewer to know who the PTC is and what they were doing during the period in question. One episode contains a brief cutaway that includes text approximating the PTC's language in a context that inverts it, comedically, a detail visible for a couple of seconds and never referenced by any character. Section 8. Eggs 71. Through 80 pop culture codes and real-world connections. The show exists at the intersection of two things: a very specific place, Rhode Island, with its particular culture and geography and landmarks, and a very broad cultural archive, the accumulated output of American movies, music, and television going back to the 1950s. Family Guy speaks both of these languages fluently and simultaneously, and the Easter eggs in this section are the ones where those two languages overlap in unexpected ways. Some of them are about Rhode Island details hidden inside what appears to be generic American setting. Others are about specific Hollywood history encoded into jokes that most of the audience took at face value. Together, they build a picture of a show made by people who had both roots and range, people who could reference Beethoven's Fifth in a disco context and then turn around and make a joke about a rib house in Providence. Family Guy is built on the assumption that its audience has seen an enormous amount of movies and television. The jokes often operate at the level of, this will only be funny if you know the specific thing being referenced, and the Easter eggs in this category push that logic even further. These are the details that require not just familiarity with the show, but familiarity with specific pockets of pop culture, Hollywood history, or media industry lore that most viewers would not have. Easter egg number 71. The Life of Larry and Larry and Steve shorts are directly visible as the DNA of the Griffin family. Before Family Guy existed, Seth MacFarlane made two short animated films while at and just after Rhode Island School of Design. The first, The Life of Larry, from 1995, featured a heavyset, not very smart man named Larry and his talking dog named Steve. The second, Larry and Steve, was produced in 1996 and aired as a segment on Cartoon Network in 1997. These two shorts are the direct ancestors of Peter and Brian Griffin, and if you watch them, the lineage is immediately clear. Larry has Peter's body type and general social situation. Steve has Brian's intelligence and their dynamic as friends. MacFarlane changed the names, built a family around the two central characters, and submitted the result to Fox. The short films are Easter eggs for the entire show, the place where Family Guy began before anyone called it Family Guy. What is remarkable about watching The Life of Larry and Larry and Steve, in the context of knowing what they became, is how complete the central idea already was in its earliest form. The joke of the smart dog and the not smart man was fully operational from the beginning. MacFarlane did not need to develop that concept, it arrived mostly formed. What the development process added was the family structure, the Rhode Island setting, the ensemble of neighbors, and the specific vocal identities that would make the characters their own. But the engine, the talking dog who is more grounded and more thoughtful than the man he lives with, was there in the thesis film. It never needed to be invented. It only needed to be expanded. Easter egg number 72. The show predicted a Kevin Spacey scandal joke years before the real events. In 2005, an episode aired that included a throwaway cutaway in which Stewie runs through a mall shouting something to the effect of having escaped from Kevin Spacey's basement. At the time, the joke landed as random surrealist celebrity humor, the kind of non sequitur the show deployed constantly in that era. Years later, when Kevin Spacey was involved in a genuine sexual misconduct scandal, the clip resurfaced and circulated widely as an example of the show having stumbled into accidental prophecy. Seth MacFarlane publicly addressed this, stating clearly that the writers knew nothing about any real behavior and that the joke was written entirely at random. This is an Easter egg that only became visible retroactively, a joke that transformed in meaning when the world around it changed. Easter egg number 73, the Barely Legal episode, used Seth Green's real audition story as the punchline of a scene. In the Season 5 episode Barely Legal, a flashback sequence shows Chris performing the Buffalo Bill Goodbye Horses dance from Silence of the Lambs. The connection to Chris is not random. When Seth Green auditioned for the role of Chris Griffin, he was reportedly dared by a friend to perform a Buffalo Bill impression for the casting session, and he did, and it helped him get the part. The episode used Chris performing this specific impression as a visual gag, which means the joke is operating on a layer that requires knowledge of Green's real audition story to fully appreciate. It is the show encoding its own casting history inside a scene that, on the surface, is just a bizarre Silence of the Lambs reference. Easter egg number 74. Stewie's voice went through multiple test recordings before MacFarlane settled on the final sound. The Stewie voice is based on Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady, but getting to the final version of that sound involved more iteration than most people know. MacFarlane experimented with different levels of Britishness, different pitches, different degrees of formal enunciation. Early voice tests for the character, some of which have surfaced through DVD extras and cast interviews, show a Stewie who sounds noticeably different from the one that aired. The specific resonance that the final voice achieved, that combination of menace and propriety, was the result of refinement, not a first-take instinct. Knowing this, the voice itself becomes a kind of Easter egg about process. What you hear when Stewie speaks is the end point of a search, not the beginning of one. Easter egg number 75. The episode where Peter discovers he's officially not part of the United States is a reference to real American legal history. In the Season 2 episode E Peterbus Unum, Peter discovers through a land survey that his property is technically not part of the United States. It falls outside the official boundaries and therefore constitutes its own sovereign nation, which Peter names Pretoria. Peter then applies for and receives recognition as a UN member state. This is played as absurdist comedy, but it draws from a real legal tradition. The United States has, throughout its history, had genuine legal disputes about property boundaries and jurisdiction that have occasionally produced unusual results. The specific premise of a homeowner discovering their property is technically its own territory has historical precedence. The show built a comedic episode around the premise without ever acknowledging that it had a real-world basis. Easter egg number 76. The Wes's Rib House reference is a real award-winning Providence restaurant. When the show makes reference to Wes's Rib House, a dining establishment that appears or is mentioned across various episodes in the context of Providence or the surrounding area, it is not an invented location. Wes's Rib House is a real restaurant in the Olneyville section of Providence that has received genuine recognition for its ribs. Its inclusion in Family Guy is one of those details where a Rhode Islander watching the show would experience a completely different moment than an out-of-state viewer. The Rhode Islander sees a real place. Everyone else sees a bit of setting. This gap in experience is one of the most consistent features of the show's geographic Easter eggs. Easter egg number 77. The Pawtucket Red Sox were a real team that played at McCoy Stadium. The Pawtucket Red Sox, the minor league baseball affiliate of the Boston Red Sox, played at McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket for decades. The stadium and team both appear in Family Guy episodes as background elements in the world of Quahog. For most viewers, this is simply local flavor, a minor league baseball reference in a show set in Rhode Island. For fans of New England baseball, it is a genuine location from a sport's actual minor league geography, used accurately enough to feel like a real visit to a real place. The Pawtucket Red Sox eventually moved and were rebranded as the Worcester Red Sox in 2021, which means the McCoy Stadium references in Family Guy have become historical documents of a now-defunct team at a now unoccupied venue. Easter egg number 78. The show's zip code was established as 00093. A code that doesn't exist in the real USPS system. In the Season 7 episode Foxy Lady, the show establishes that Quahog's zip code is 00093. Zip codes beginning with 000 do not exist in the real United States postal system. Zip codes in Rhode Island begin with 028 or 029. The writers chose 00093, which is a fictional number designed to look like a real zip code while being clearly impossible, ensuring that nobody would accidentally send mail to Quahog. It is a small logistical Easter egg, the show filling in a bureaucratic detail about its fictional town in a way that is both internally consistent and carefully prevented from bleeding into reality. Easter egg number 79. The show has made recurring jokes about its own status on Fox that were read very differently before MacFarlane's public statements about the network. Before MacFarlane publicly shared his discomfort with Family Guy's place on Fox, the tweet in 2021, the failing marriage metaphor. There were episodes that made jokes about the show's network relationship in ways that could be read as playful or as something more pointed. A cutaway that briefly shows an Adult Swim-style bumper telling the audience they're currently watching the show on Fox and that it's better on Adult Swim reads differently after, MacFarlane's genuine frustrations. What seemed like light meta-humor about the network's censorship standards takes on a more charged quality in retrospect. The Easter egg is the gap between how those jokes read in their original broadcast context and how they read after the creative relationship became public knowledge. Easter egg number 80. The Dell's Lemonade reference is a specific Rhode Island cultural institution. Dell's Lemonade is a frozen lemonade brand that is, to Rhode Islanders, something approaching a civic institution. It has been operating in the state since 1948 and is one of those intensely local food items, like a particular regional pizza style or a specific barbecue culture that means nothing to an outsider but has enormous, effective weight for the people who grew up with it. When Dell's Lemonade appears in a Family Guy episode, it functions exactly the way the Big Blue Bug does, as a transparent signal to Rhode Island viewers that the people who made this show actually lived there, and that the world of Quahog is not a generic animated American suburb, but a specific place with specific things that belong to it. Section 9. Eggs 81. Through 90 subtle lore, story logic, and things the show never explained. There is something particularly satisfying about the kind of Easter egg that is not a visual planted in a background, but a logical thread woven into the structure of the story itself. These are the ones that require you to hold multiple episodes in your head at once. To notice when something in a later episode connects to something from several seasons earlier, to catch the moment when the show quietly acknowledges a bit of continuity without announcing it. These are also the Easter eggs most likely to be entirely invisible to anyone watching the show casually because they are not things you see so much as things you recognize, and recognition requires memory. The following entries are for the viewers who remember things. Who notice when a carpet still smells like something that happened 3 seasons ago? Who catch the moment when a chicken at a veterinary clinic makes eye contact with Peter in a way that carries history? Some Easter eggs are visual, some are auditory, and some are structural, buried in the logic of the show's world, in the way its rules operate, in the choices it made about what to explain and what to leave sitting in silence. These are the Easter eggs that reward not just attentive viewing but extended thinking about how the show's universe fits together. Easter egg number 81. Stewie could apparently not be understood by most adults until the show changed the rule without announcing it. In the first few seasons, the show operated on a specific internal logic regarding Stewie's speech. Most adults couldn't understand him. They heard babbling. Brian was the exception. He could understand Stewie and converse with him. This is why the Brian-Stewie friendship was the one authentic relationship Stewie had in the early seasons. But as the show progressed, this rule quietly dissolved. Other characters began responding directly to things Stewie said. Lois and Peter began reacting to his comments in ways that only made sense if they could hear and understand him. The show never addressed this change. It was simply allowed to happen, gradually, until the original premise was simply no longer in effect. If you watch early seasons and late seasons side by side, the shift is jarring, and the absence of any in-show explanation for it makes it one of the more conspicuous pieces of quiet world-building that the show simply abandoned. The original rule created a dramatic irony that the early show used beautifully. When Stewie announced his plans to kill Lois, the comedy was sharpened by the fact that Lois was standing right there and couldn't hear what was being said about her. When Stewie delivered a monologue about world domination to a room full of family members, their obliviousness to what was happening was the source of the joke. Once other characters could hear and understand Stewie, that specific ironic register became unavailable. The show's solution was to simply stop needing it to move Stewie in directions that did not require the dramatic gap between his interior world and the world's ignorance of it. The rule change was the Easter egg of an ending, the quiet retirement of a comedic premise that the show had relied on but never officially said goodbye to. Easter egg number 82. Brian's novel has a title that changed between references. Brian's long gestating novel has been a running source of character commentary throughout the show. The unfinished manuscript is a symbol of his aspirational self-image versus his actual follow-through. But the title of the novel has been inconsistent across references. In some episodes, it is referenced as one thing. In later references, it appears to have a different name. The show never drew attention to the inconsistency. This could be read as a continuity error, or it could be read more charitably as the show making a quiet joke about the kind of writer Brian is. Someone whose idea of himself is in constant revision, who keeps reimagining his project rather than finishing it. Easter egg number 83. The Ipecac challenge from Season 8 was directly referenced in The Life of Brian, with a background detail. The Ipecac challenge, where Brian, Stewie, Peter, and Meg all drink an emetic and wait to see who throws up last, is one of the show's most committed gross-out sequences, and exists primarily as a tour de force of sustained, uncomfortable comedy. In the Season 12 episode Life of Brian, when Vinny arrives as the replacement dog after Brian's death, he makes a passing comment about the smell in the carpet. The carpet still smells like that. The show remembered. The Ipecac episode left a mark on the Griffin house that persisted across multiple seasons as an unreferenced background detail, until Life of Brian made the reference explicit. It is the kind of detail that rewards the viewer who has seen enough of the show to know what Vinny is describing. Easter egg number 84. The chicken community knows about Peter and has formed an opinion. In Life of Brian, when the Griffins are at the veterinarian, Peter is snubbed by a chicken in the waiting room. The chicken recognizes him. The chicken's reaction makes it clear that Peter's reputation in the chicken community, specifically his repeated, catastrophic attacks on Ernie the giant chicken, has spread. There is a chicken community. It has collective knowledge. It has formed views on Peter Griffin specifically. The snub is a throwaway visual beat in an episode primarily dealing with Brian's death, but it implies that the Ernie the giant chicken storyline has real consequences in the world of the show that extend beyond the specific fights a chicken diaspora that is aware of what Peter has done. Easter egg number 85. Herbert's full first name was only officially revealed in a Valentine's Day episode. Herbert the Pervert appeared across multiple seasons before the show quietly confirmed his first name as John, full name John Herbert, in Valentine's Day in Quahog. His last name had long been used as a label by fans and staff alike, but the first name was ambiguous for years. The Valentine's Day episode contained enough context to make the confirmation feel natural rather than announced, which is consistent with the show's general approach to Herbert's character, adding detail gradually, without ceremony, in episodes where his presence is peripheral rather than central. Easter egg number 86. The show established that Quahog was founded by an ancestor of Peter's, and that the founding story is a myth. An episode in the later seasons reveals that Quahog was founded by Griffin Peterson, an ancestor who had been exiled to America by King Stuart III. The show later complicates this by establishing that the official founding story of Quahog involves a figure named Miles Chatterbox, Musket, and a magical talking clam, a mythology taught in schools and accepted as fact by the town. The actual Griffin family history and the civic mythology of Quahog's founding are therefore in contradiction, and the show holds both versions simultaneously without forcing a resolution. This is the kind of embedded civic lore that you would expect a real small American town to have competing founding narratives, official myths alongside private family histories. Easter egg number 87. The show's official confirmation that Peter's house is not legally part of the United States was never resolved, meaning Peter could still secede today. The Season 2 episode E Peterbus Unum established that the Griffin property falls outside the official boundaries of the United States. At the end of the episode, Peter voluntarily rejoins the U.S. after some diplomatic chaos, but the show never produced a formal on-screen confirmation that the legal status of the property was corrected. In the show's internal logic, Peter's house remains in a potentially ambiguous legal state, still possibly its own nation, the boundary error never officially resolved. This has the structure of a hanging Easter egg, a plot point that was never tied off, sitting quietly in the show's history, available to any writer who wanted to pull it back out. Easter egg number 88, the Peter's Sister episode provided a legitimate origin story for Peter's treatment of Meg, and the show immediately forgot it. Season 14's Peter's Sister is an episode that attempts to provide psychological context for why Peter treats Meg the way he does. The episode reveals that Peter was physically and emotionally abused by his own sister growing up, and that this cycle of abuse is part of what turned him into the kind of father who targets his daughter for cruelty. Meg and Peter reconcile. The episode ends on a note of genuine emotional warmth. Then in subsequent episodes, the treatment of Meg continues as it had before, with no acknowledgement of the reconciliation. The origin story exists in the show's canon. The character behavior it was supposed to explain continued unchanged. The Easter egg is the gap between those two facts, the show's occasional awareness that its cruelty required explanation, and its equal unwillingness to let that explanation change anything. Easter egg number 89. The Life of Brian death was planned as permanent before the decision was reversed. When Brian was killed in Life of Brian in Season 12, the production's public statement suggested the death was meant to be final. A replacement dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico of The Sopranos, was brought in and given a genuine attempt at characterization. But just 2 episodes later, Stewie used a stolen time travel device to go back and prevent Brian's death, and Brian was restored. Whether the original death was always intended as a brief stunt or was genuinely planned as permanent before a reversal decision was made at the network or production level, the detail that matters for Easter egg purposes is this. In the period between Brian's death and his return, the writers put meaningful effort into making Vinny feel like a real character, including a recurring background gag in the uncut version of Life of Brian, where Vinny calls his mother to update her on his life with his new family. This gag only appears in the uncensored version, meaning it exists as a layer of characterization that broadcast viewers never saw. Easter egg number 90. The show's chronology is deliberately unstable in ways that were planned, not accidental. Family Guy operates in what television writers sometimes call a floating present. The family ages at a glacially slow rate relative to the number of episodes that have aired. Characters reference events from different time periods without the dates adding up, and the world around them updates to contemporary technology and culture without the characters seeming to exist in any specific historical moment. This is not a mistake. It is a deliberate structural choice that allows the show to make topical jokes without being locked to a specific year, and to reference history without being constrained by the characters' stated ages. The show has even addressed this directly in-universe in Family Guy Through the Years, which uses a frame where the Griffins exist across different historical periods, and one character attributes the show's chronological impossibility to a wizard, a TV trope shorthand for "we are aware of this inconsistency and choose not to explain it." Section 10. Eggs 91 through 101. The rarest, the most obscure, and the most rewarding. There is a particular kind of satisfaction in finally reaching the end of something that was designed to be experienced slowly. A list like this one is really an argument for patience, an argument that the rewards built into something are proportional to the attention you bring to it. That is true of the show we've been discussing tonight, and it is true of this list. The entries in this final section are not necessarily the most visually spectacular or the most immediately funny. Some of them are genuinely quiet, some of them are more melancholy than comic. But they are the ones that feel, when you encounter them, like finding something that was left specifically for you, a letter from the people who made something, sealed inside it for whoever showed up willing to look. We are at the end of our walk through the hidden world of Family Guy. The final 11 Easter eggs on this list are the ones that require the most context to appreciate the ones buried deepest in the show's production history, its relationships with other media, and its own awareness of what it is. These are the details that the most committed fans have spent years assembling and arguing over, and the ones that feel, when you finally find them, like the show was waiting for you to catch up. Easter egg number 91. MacFarlane's connection to the 9/11 attacks is part of the show's real history. This is not a comedic Easter egg, but a historical one. Seth MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 on the morning of the 11th of September 2001. He missed his flight because his travel agent had given him the wrong departure time, and he arrived at Logan Airport to find the flight had already boarded. American Airlines Flight 1 was the first plane to hit the World Trade Center. MacFarlane narrowly escaped death by a scheduling error. Family Guy had already been canceled by Fox once at this point and was in a period of creative limbo. MacFarlane's survival is part of the reason the show came back. It is one of those biographical facts that sits underneath the entire later history of the show, the near ending that didn't happen, from which everything else followed. Every season of Family Guy after 2001, every character arc, every cutaway gag, every road trip episode, every giant chicken fight exists because a travel agent gave Seth MacFarlane the wrong time. That is not exactly an Easter egg in the conventional sense, but it is the hidden foundation beneath everything that followed. If you are the kind of person who thinks about the contingency of things, about how much history depends on small accidents, then every episode of Family Guy after Season 3 carries this fact inside it, invisible and enormous. Easter egg number 92. The original pitch pilot's full version was only found in March 2025, 27 years after it was made. The 15-minute pitch pilot that MacFarlane assembled to sell Family Guy to Fox in 1998 was effectively lost media for most of the show's history. A 7-minute portion appeared as a DVD bonus feature, but the complete version was unknown to the public for nearly 3 decades. In March 2025, the full pitch was found on the website of animator Robert Paulson and re-uploaded for public viewing. The discovery allowed fans to see the show's true starting point for the first time: Lois as a blonde, Chris, voiced by MacFarlane, a rougher and stranger version of the world that would eventually become Family Guy. The pilot itself is now an Easter egg in the fullest sense, something hidden, discovered, and containing within it the seeds of a much larger story. Easter egg number 93. The show's first season had every episode titled after something to do with death. This has been touched on earlier, but the full list is worth revisiting now that we're near the end. Death Has a Shadow, I Never Met the Dead Man, Chitty Chitty Death Bang. These first season titles all carry death in or near their name. The writers have confirmed this was intentional, a structural reference to radio, mystery, drama conventions, and that the idea was eventually dropped because the titles were difficult to use in production conversation. But for the first few episodes, the show was building a kind of death-tinged semantic atmosphere around itself, like a noir opening that gets interrupted and never quite returns to its original register. Easter egg number 94. The Brick Hartman Connection. The creator of Fairly OddParents voiced characters in the Family Guy pilot. Butch Hartman, who created the Fairly OddParents, and Danny Phantom for Nickelodeon, and who is one of the more prominent figures in early 2000s. Animation voiced multiple characters in Family Guy's original pitch pilot, including Mr. Weed. This is the kind of fact that requires knowledge of multiple adjacent corners of the animation industry to appreciate fully. Hartman went on to create beloved children's programming. The world of Family Guy's origin story is more populated with recognizable names than its mythology usually suggests. Easter egg number 95. The show's Emmy nomination for Outstanding Comedy was historic for animation. When Family Guy received a Primetime Emmy Award nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009, it was the first time an animated series had received that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961, nearly 50 years earlier. The Simpsons, despite its enormous critical standing and cultural influence, never received this nomination. Family Guy getting it was both an anomaly and a recognition of the show's genuine achievement during the periods when it was working at its best. The nomination is effectively an Easter egg buried in award show history, the kind of fact that reveals something significant about where Family Guy stood critically at a very specific moment in its run. The 2009 nomination came at the tail end of what most critics would call the show's creative peak. The seasons in the late 2000s, when the revival energy was still present and the character erosion had not yet become the dominant story. It is a timestamp in award show history that records a specific window of the show's quality, preserved in a nomination rather than a win, sitting quietly in the record books as evidence that there was a time when Family Guy was taken seriously by television's most establishment institution. That time produced this nomination and then passed, and the show continued. The nomination stayed in the record. TV Guide ranked the show as the 9th greatest television cartoon of all time. In 2013, another timestamp, another window of critical regard that the show's history preserved even as the show itself moved into territories that drew considerably less praise. Easter egg number 96. Adam West's appearances as mayor were shaped by his own input and his real willingness to play with his image. Adam West, who had famously played Batman in the 1966 television series, and who spent decades navigating the cultural legacy of that role, brought a genuine collaborative energy to his work as Mayor Adam West on Family Guy. He was, by accounts from the production staff, enthusiastic about the ways the show played with his public image, willing to do voice recordings that made fun of the Batman legacy, the Mayor West persona, and Adam West the person. His death in 2017 required the show to address his absence. The character of Mayor Adam West was eventually replaced, and there was a genuine quality of mourning in how the show handled the transition. The Easter egg is in all the episodes where West voiced the mayor with self-aware glee, a performance that was also a kind of portrait of an actor who had made peace with and found humor in everything his career had become. Easter egg number 97. Peter's birth certificate places him in Newport County, which is where the show says Quahog is located. In the Season 12 episode Quagmire's Mom, a document is visible that functions as Peter's birth certificate. On it, the location of birth is listed as Newport County. This is consistent with the show's established geography. The Family Guy wiki and various canonical episode references place Quahog in Newport County, Rhode Island. The birth certificate is a piece of internal documentation that the show planted inside a scene for a different purpose, but which, if you freeze it, reveals a piece of canonical geography that was consistent with what the show had established elsewhere. It is an Easter egg that confirms rather than contradicts, which is a less dramatic but more satisfying type. Easter egg number 98. The show hid a long-running clue about the evil monkey's nature in background shots of the closet across multiple seasons. In various episodes before the evil monkey's origin was revealed, before the show disclosed that he had once been a happy monkey devastated by a failed marriage, there are background shots of Chris's closet that contain, if you look carefully, small details about what the monkey's existence in the closet was actually like. Evidence of a creature that had been living in a small enclosed space for an extended period, doing his best to make it habitable. These details were not flagged by the show. They were not pointed out. They accumulated across seasons as background art choices that made more sense retroactively once the origin story aired than they did at the time. Easter egg number 99. Walter Murphy's history with disco is audible in the show's musical DNA. Walter Murphy's 1976 hit, A Fifth of Beethoven, the disco reworking of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony that became a chart hit and appeared on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, is not random. Biography. It tells you something about the specific musical sensibility Murphy brought to Family Guy. The show's underscore, particularly in its early seasons, has a quality of knowing, slightly retro sophistication that reflects Murphy's facility with multiple musical styles. The big band jazz of the theme, the way the show deploys orchestral gestures at emotional moments, the use of classic popular song forms, all of it reflects a composer who understood that music could do multiple things at once: signal genre, comment on action, and provide aesthetic pleasure independent of the images it was accompanying. The disco hit is an Easter egg for the show's musical intelligence. Easter egg number 100. The Simpsons crossover contained a reference to Roger from American Dad that acknowledged his show's network change. When Roger appears in the Mos Eisley Cantina during Blue Harvest and immediately departs, the implication is that he is acknowledging his changed status relative to Fox's animated lineup. But in The Simpsons Guy, there is another quiet Roger acknowledgement. During Peter and Homer's fight, Roger from American Dad briefly appears and then swiftly leaves, and the detail that makes this an Easter egg rather than just a cameo is the speed and completeness of his departure. The joke, for those who understood it, was that Roger was no longer a Fox character, that his show had migrated to TBS, and that his brief appearances in Fox Universe crossover content therefore came with an inherent awkwardness that he embodied by constantly arriving and leaving without settling anywhere. He is a character who no longer belongs in the space he's visiting, and his movement reflects that. Easter egg number 101. The show's full title technically is Family Guy without a the, and episodes have made a joke of this. For most of its history, the show has simply been called Family Guy. But there has been a persistent question about whether the official title includes a the, whether it is the Family Guy or just Family Guy. In the episode Family Guy Through the Bronx, years, one of the tourists passing through the historical recreation refers to the show as The Family Guy, and the moment is flagged as a meta joke about the show's correct name. There have been other episodes where the same name confusion has been referenced. On the actual title card, there is no "the." But the question has followed the show long enough that it became material for the writers, who folded it into the show's self-aware commentary. The final Easter egg on this list is the show's own name, a detail that most people have never been entirely sure about, hiding in plain sight for the entire run. And that is 101. We've covered the whole map tonight, from the lost 1998 pilot to the recursive name joke buried in an anniversary episode. From the real Providence skyline visible behind the Griffin house to the secret life of the evil monkey on Chris's bed with his headphones on and his fog hat record turning slowly in the dark. From the expired coupon that launched a decade of catastrophic giant chicken violence to the DVD headline that punished you for looking for the joke. From Stewie's block spelling something out in the opening sequence to Lois's Facebook page sitting with Meg's friend request unanswered, a small, devastating image of a mother who cannot quite be bothered to accept her daughter's attempt to connect. A list like this one does something specific to how you watch a show. Once you know that the backgrounds in Family Guy were built to be read, you start reading them. Once you know that text was hidden in newspaper margins and TV guide pages and book spines and license plates, you slow down. You develop the instinct to pause, which is probably the instinct the people who hid these things wanted to cultivate in you. They were building a relationship with a certain kind of viewer, the viewer who notices things. The viewer who watched the first episode 23 times and still found something new on the 24th. That viewer was always there, in every era of the show's history, and the Easter eggs are proof that the production knew they were there and valued them. What is interesting about Family Guy's hidden details, what separates them from the Easter eggs in some other shows, is that they have always reflected the specific personality of the people who put them there. The hidden jokes in this show are not sentimental as a rule. They tend to be arch, self-aware, occasionally petty, and frequently smarter than they need to be to get the laugh. The newspaper that mocks you for finding the newspaper joke, the Adult Swim bumper that shows up inside a Fox broadcast, the chicken in the waiting room who snubs Peter without explanation. These Easter eggs are not tucked away out of charity for the attentive fan. They are tucked away because someone in the production found it genuinely funny to put them there, and the fact that almost no one would ever find them was part of the appeal. There is something worth saying about what this kind of care represents in a show that ran for as long as Family Guy has. Long-running television tends to develop a certain mechanical quality over time. The production rhythm takes over, the writing becomes procedural, the jokes stop being discovered and start being assembled. Family Guy has not been immune to this, and the transcript of its creative decline has been written many times. But buried inside even its more exhausted seasons, the Easter eggs kept appearing. Background text that required someone to think about what it should say. Self-aware jokes that required enough awareness of the show's own history to be meaningful. Characters whose personal biographies accumulated in throwaway lines across many years. Someone was still paying attention, even when the show's critics argued that the writing had stopped trying. There are details in this show that have not been found yet. There are books on shelves that no one has slowed down enough to read, and signs in the background of crowd scenes that no frame-by-frame analysis has gotten to, and newspaper headlines in scenes where the newspaper was never the point of the shot. Family Guy has generated an enormous number of frames across its run, more than 24 seasons, more than 460 episodes, and the Easter egg map of that output is certainly incomplete. Somewhere in an episode that airs mostly unremarked upon, in the background of a scene that most people watch while doing something else, there is a detail that is waiting to be found by the person who finally stops and looks at it. If you found something in tonight's list that you recognize from your own watching, or something that made you want to go back and check an episode, leave that in the comments. These kinds of lists grow when people add to them. Someone knows something about an episode from season 16 that belongs on a list like this and hasn't shared it yet. Someone has paused on a background in a season 22 episode and seen something that wasn't in any of the usual write-ups. If that's you, the comments are the right place for it. And if you've made it this far, drop a like on this video. Subscribe if you haven't. It matters more than the button implies. It is the thing that makes it possible to come back here and do this again, to take another long and slow walk through something that was built with more care than it usually gets credit for. Rest well tonight. Take your time with things that were made to be taken slowly. We'll see you in the next one.